You know, I read the other day that 90% of the people in our country celebrate Christmas. Now, only about 46% of them consider it to be a religious holiday. And this means that there are about 44% who just consider it to be a cultural holiday. It's very widespread in both areas. And for me, I know that as I enter into it, it enters into me. It's just like a good book, a good movie, a sporting event. As we enter into the spirit of it enters into us. And I don't know about y'all, but that happens to me every year. And I think it probably happens to a lot of other people as well. I couldn't resist it if I tried, not that I ever do. But we find that for all the people who celebrate Christmas, that there is a great outpouring of love, of generosity, and reaching out to friends and for people that we don't even know. And now I just noticed that in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, back in November, someone paid off 62 layaways at Toys R Us for $10,760. And last year, and I know these are just a few examples, of course, last year in Everett, Pennsylvania, someone paid off 194 layaways at Walmart for $46,265.59. And of course, there's something going on there, that spirit of Christmas. And as far as I'm concerned, I believe that spirit of Christmas is love. And most of us experience love to some degree or another. Now, in our celebrations of Christmas here, we bunch together a lot of things. I asked Marietta to read the religious thing about 12 Days of Christmas, and David to bring up Santa Claus for us. We have a Christmas tree. We have gifts under the tree that were provided by our dear Carrie Ryan. We have a wreath on the door, and we have lights and lights just about every place that you look. Now, each one of these traditions has its own long history, and we bunch them all together for our Christmas celebration. And we've been doing this for a long period of time, and it works quite nicely for us. And there are some others that I didn't even mention. Now, Christmas evolved from the birth of Jesus. At least that's the way we see it here. But it's very sweet and interesting to note that even though it started with a celebration of the birth of Jesus, it seems to have evolved in a celebration of the two commandments that Jesus gave us. And they were to love God with all of your heart. And that means to love yourself, because as we have been told, that each one of us is an individualization of God. And the second commandment was to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And we really see that all over the place, in communities large and small, all over the country. Not only in our country, but in other countries as well. Now, wars are very challenging times for us, probably the most that we experience. And it's unfortunate that these wars are just the opposite of what Christmas seems to be about. Nonetheless, that in wartime we find examples of this outpouring, this generosity, this love, and also bravery on the part of people. And last Christmas, on Christmas Day, I talked with you about the fairly well-known Christmas truce that took place in 1914 during World War I. And this was quite large scale. And it has become fairly famous by books and dramatic productions and so forth. However, the generals, after this happened, were not terribly happy about it, and they have taken measures to make sure that it didn't happen again. Nonetheless, we know that on smaller scales, they had to take place because as we open to divine guidance, that supersedes and overcomes any orders that one might have. And a good example of this, though we know most of these were not documented, but there is a good example of one that is well documented. And this took place on Christmas Eve of 1944 during the Second World War. It was not planned. But there was a German woman and her 12-year-old son, Fritz, and they were living in a cabin in the forest very near the battlegrounds where battles were taking place. Now, they had warmth. They had plenty of wood, obviously, so they had a fire. And they also had plenty of food, and she was preparing a holiday meal, to prepare a holiday meal. And there was a knock on the door, and she opened the door, and there were 3 American soldiers, one of whom was wounded. And they were cold, they were lost, and they wanted to come in, and she invited them in. A few minutes later, there was another knock on the door, and she answered that, and it was 4 German soldiers who were also lost and cold and hungry. And even though this was a capital offense, and she could have lost her life, she invited them in as well. The capital offense, of course, was sheltering the enemy, which was the 3 American soldiers. And this was really an act of courage on her part. She had them leave all their weapons outside. And she went about preparing a nourishing holiday meal for them. And she invited them to stay overnight. Now, during this time, the German soldiers and the American soldiers acknowledged each other as friends. And the next morning, the German soldiers, one of whom had medical training, took care of the wounded American soldier, and then they gave them directions. The Germans gave the Americans directions back to their units. And there's more. In 1995, Fritz, who was by that time in his 60s, the son, was living in Hawaii. And through various ways, he was put in contact with one of the American soldiers. And he visited this soldier the next year. And then they found that there was another one, another soldier, of two of the three then he met and had communication with them. And they all, of course, acknowledged that that Fritz's mother was responsible for saving their life. Now, Christmas does celebrate the birth of Jesus in a stable. We know, we read that in the Bible, according to the Bible. But this is not well documented. And some of the biblical accounts are seriously challenged. But you know, the accounts convey a spiritual message that is far greater in importance than the physical message. Our founder, Ernest Holmes, wrote, "Suppose we were to think of the description of the Nativity as a grouping of beautiful word pictures meant to represent those experiences which we all have as we search for the meaning of life and try to draw ever closer to the divine presence which fills all space." And in this month's Science of Mind magazine, Dr. David Alexander, who writes regularly for the magazine, added, "In other words, what if we take on Christmas stories as an invitation to our awakening? Angels, shepherds, wise men from the East, all representing our own soul's awakening to the highest divine potential that lives within all creation." That certainly is a metaphysical and new thought way of looking at this thing called Christmas. And I believe that whatever the physical facts may have been for the birth of Jesus, the loving biblical accounts come alive for millions of people every December as part of the Christmas spirit. And it's just as real as the Christmas spirit is, that Christmas spirit that we all feel. And now we're about to have our candle lighting. As we prepare for our candle lighting ritual, I remind you that rituals are physical actions directed toward deeper spiritual meanings. Throughout the world, people light candles for a number of reasons: to evoke spirit, to offer blessings, to solidify intentions, to nourish grateful living, to dedicate prayers, to illuminate darkness. For me, the physical light of the candle connects with the expansion of inner illumination that is a growing awareness of my Christ consciousness. And we're going to have a minute of silence now while each of you decide what lighting the candle means for your life.